afternoon. Uh, this is part of the Office of the Juvenile Defender's virtual training series. We usually have at least one virtual training a month um, on sometimes foundational topics and other times maybe somewhat esoteric topics. But today we've got a real treat for you because you won't actually have to listen to anybody from our office, which is a switch. Uh, we have four experts from the Division of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention talking about an issue that affects all of our clients, and that's placement and other services for our clients um, in the community. And so we have with us today Austin Long, Candace Moore, Cindy Porterfield, and Dr. Sonia Friesen. And let me just give a little bit of a background on each. So Candace is the implementation manager in court services. She got her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Math from Salem College and her Master's in Public Administration from App State. And since then, she's devoted her career to the life and development of youth, families, and community. Prior to this, she was evidence-based practices administrator with Department of Public Safety, as well as a juvenile court counselor. Um, so she's also worked with the system of care coordinator with Crossroads Behavioral Health and a lead system of care liaison with Partners Behavioral Health Management. Dr. Friesen is a psychological program manager slash juvenile detention. Um, she is a licensed psychologist specializing in working with children, youth, and families. And she got a dual degree from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where she received her PhD in clinical psychology and a master's in public health. She got her bachelor's in science and psychology at Ohio State and has worked in clinical leadership in juvenile justice residential facilities. Cindy Porterfield is DJJDP's Director of Community Programs, and she's worked with DPS for over 23 years, and she has long been a resource for youth involved in the juvenile justice system and to try to create teams and programs to provide positive outcomes for youth. And last but certainly not least, we have Austin Long, and she is currently Assistant General Counsel uh, with DPS, but supports the Division of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Prior to that, she was program attorney at the UNC School of Government, where she educated a whole host of defenders, doing trainings, providing technical support, and doing writings. She also had a whole other career working in drug court, both as the manager and coordinator at Montgomery County Circuit Court, and was also project director at the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. And before that, she did direct representation, juvenile delinquency, and child welfare court, both with the Public Defender's Office in Durham and also in private practice. But most importantly, she was with the Office of the Juvenile Defender as our project attorney, and we end with that because that's who we are. Thank you, Austin, but thank all four of you for coming to us this afternoon and talking about placement and services for youth in North Carolina. And with that, Candace, I think are you leading us off?
Well, I guess you did such a wonderful job, Eric, introducing all of us. Wow, that is wonderful. And yes, I am a proud alumni of the OJD team. But I'm also very proud and happy to be with DPS and representing and providing advice and counsel to the Division of Juvenile Justice. The only thing I would add to that is for all the defenders that are on the line, in my last year, I guess year and a half in supporting the Division of Juvenile Justice here at DPS, I will say that no matter what your experiences on your local level with juvenile justice staff, because I know that some attorneys may not have the best relationships or experiences, but I'm going to tell you that the Division of Juvenile Justice on a whole, from the leadership to the management to all of the staff on the local level across the state, they are a group, they are one of the most committed, passionate group of people that I've worked with that really want to get it right for our juveniles, for our youth. They want to get it right. They want to, legally do the right thing, but also what's best for the juveniles. So just be confident in that with the Division of Juvenile Justice as a whole. So with that being said, I will just turn it over to Candace because Eric did such a wonderful job. Thank you, Eric.
Yes, thank you, Eric. So I'm impressed. So I'm like, where did he get this information when he started? So I think it's just it was a surprise. I don't know if it showed on my face or not, but thank you for that wonderful introduction, so Eric, of us all. So we're glad to be with you today. I am Candace Moore, and so I am the implementation manager. So with court services within juvenile justice. So I'm just really happy to be with you today. So Austin, and everyone, so do we want to still hand it off and have everyone just to say hello?
I think maybe we can wait until they get to their portion.
All right.
Okay.
So I think our next, we just want to roll over now and talk about a little bit about our agenda today. So one of the first things we're going to talk about in regards to our agenda, is we're going to talk about the continuum of care. So that's the continuum of care related to juvenile justice. So then we're going to lead in then and talk a little bit about our levels of juvenile justice residential placement. We'll talk about the role of the court counselor. So we'll also talk about behavioral health placement and the process there. And so how decisions are made as well. And so we'll finish up today talking about barriers, any barriers to behavioral health residential placement, and also points where you may have questions, and then also how you can help advocate too. So for the youth and those that you represent. So, and how we can work together in that. So ladies, so anything that I missed, so in our agenda today. So we'll kick it off then with our continuum of care. So when we talk about this as a continuum of care, so we're not talking about all of the services that some might imagine. So we do want to talk about, though, the continuum of care, so as related to juvenile justice. So when we say that, we mean, so what does it look like when a juvenile starts working with us, when juvenile justice becomes involved? And so and most of this, of course, is going to occur all at the local level. But what's going to happen is, of course, a youth. So his behavior is going to rise to the level of, being delinquent. So that youth then may be law enforcement or anyone in the public can, of course, file a complaint with our office, come in and file charges. So that's done at the local office. So as a result of that complaint with the youth, so then our office then will schedule, our court counselors at the local level will schedule a meeting, so with the youth and family. And so during that meeting, and again, I want to just make sure that you understand, I'm not going to cover every little aspect of what occurs, but I just do want to kind of lay a framework here so that we can kind of all understand kind of how this gets started. So for how a youth comes into contact with us, and then how then you come into contact with them, and so how we intersect with that. So kind of leading up to the placement. So just a little background. So then we'll, during that intake, some key things that happen. So that appointment with the youth and family. That is where our YAZI information is collected. So as a result of that intake meeting, we actually go in and score our risk and needs assessment and also our strengths assessment. And that is called the YAZI, which is the Youth Assessment and Screening Instrument. And so as a result of that, we get back risk to recidivate information. We also get back needs information. So information on how the criminogenic needs, where we need to focus some of our energy. So, and when working with the youth, so if we're going to target how to assist them in not staying involved with juvenile justice, how to help them through that process. Also strengths. So, and all this is by life domains. So we get back that needs and strengths information by life domains. And so we also we also collect information so we can score a GAIN short screener. And that's the Global Appraisal of Individual Needs short screener. And that's going to help us to determine when a youth may need further assessment as well with behavioral health. So it'll help us, it'll identify those youth that score higher that may need further assessment, so that we may need to refer out to a clinical provider. And also other information is utilized. So we collect, of course, victim information, information based on the offense itself, their history level. So, but all this helps us in being able to then create the recommendations. So if it is approved for court. So again, I think I've already mentioned the offense seriousness, the delinquency history, of course, the complainant's requests, the victim's requests, so as well as the youth and families' preferences. So then if it does come to court, if the decision is, of course, to come to court, that is where most often our court services staff, and the youth, and you become involved, so as a juvenile defender. And so that's kind of where we're going to kick this off a little bit then and talk a little bit more about what does it look like. So the intersect, and then also leading up to placement. So Cindy, I believe.
Yes. The PowerPoint left my screen. Does everybody still see it?
Candace, can you just project it for her?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
We apologize. Technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Okay.
All right, Cindy, there you go, dear.
All right, go to the next slide, please. Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Porterfield, and I'm the Director of Juvenile Community Programs. So this is a great opportunity to be able to share some of the resources that are available here in juvenile justice that can assist you with representing your juvenile. Juvenile justice really in North Carolina underwent a huge metamorphic change in 1998 with the Juvenile Justice Reform Act. And we adopted the OJJDP comprehensive strategy as our own. And so what I want you to understand from this is that there are appropriate services to meet the need no matter where that child is across the continuum. I like to look at this in the sense of looking at us addressing the behavior. If you look at the continuum here, we have kids with problem behavior that usually our at-risk programs can address. And where do those programs come from? Well, they're in your community, but they're also embedded in the work of the juvenile crime prevention councils that are located in all 100 counties. And those allocated funds to those 100 counties help build this continuum so that we meet the need of youth that have the greatest risk that come to our attention, and all of those target populations between those that are at risk and those that are actually exiting our youth development centers. So it's really important that diving in locally into your local resources becomes one of the first steps to help address the needs of youth and those criminogenic needs and those all needs that the youth may have that have been assessed during the intake process. But also there are programs that are available through another funding stream that the General Assembly has given us to be able to address those targeted populations that need additional work, that have complex needs that that must be addressed to prevent them from going deeper in the system. So it is a continuum. We like to build it locally, but we do have resources available through juvenile justice that offer a continuum for deeper in kids that need more intensive services. And we will go over those later in this presentation. Next slide. So this is a comprehensive map of North Carolina's juvenile justice system and how we divide ourselves up in order to meet the needs of juveniles all across North Carolina. Our entire division is divided up into 4 different areas of North Carolina. And so what you'll find is facility operations, as well as court services, and even community programs are operating out of hubs within each one of those main 4 areas of North Carolina, whether it be the Eastern, the Central, the Piedmont, or the West. Now, this is a really busy slide, but just to let you know, these are some of the resources that are identified, residential resources, as well as the systems resources in terms of detention facilities and our youth development centers. So we'll get a little bit more in detail about each one of the community programs residential resources that may be available in terms of the topic today, and that is placement.
So thank you, Cindy. So what you see here next is just our disposition examples. So our intent with sharing this, and there's another slide too here, so with talking about level 1 and level 2, is that once a youth, along that continuum that Cindy mentioned, so in our juvenile justice offices, that when they are coming to court, then based on those risks and needs, based on all the factors, that when the predisposition report is prepared, and so based on the offense, the delinquency history, so when juvenile justice is making these recommendations, so there's an array of services so that may be available. And so what you see here is just some examples of a level 1 dispositional alternatives. So, and of course, these examples, we've split these out so that you can just see there's some community-based programming, so that we'll speak on later as well. So I know Cindy's going to do a wonderful job sharing with you some great things, some examples of those programs. There's also intensive substance abuse treatment programs as well. So, and so one of those examples is, of course, our substance abuse intensive outpatient programs that are, of course, with our mental health agencies and providers. There's also residential treatment programs, which I know one of the things we want to talk about and be very specific about today is our placement, and that's part of why we're all here today, but any placement concerns in the placement process. But there's a whole array of residential treatment programs. And so those varying from, and we'll talk about these shortly, therapeutic foster care all the way through psychiatric residential treatment facilities. And so that is, of course, Medicaid service definitions. Those are the behavioral health, mental health service definitions. But then there's also some non-residential treatment programs. And these are, again, Medicaid service definitions, but there's also a couple things here, like at the bottom, the comprehensive evaluation of sexual harm and the task. Those are also services funded under JJ as well, juvenile justice. So we also have some victim offender reconciliation programs with our mediation and our conflict resolution. And then also just some additional residential wilderness programs here, which a couple examples, Timber Ridge and then the Cameron Boys Camp. So, and again, this is not meant to be an all-inclusive list. This is just some examples of what might show up on a level 1 disposition. So a youth charged with a misdemeanor, so or a youth that perhaps is in the court system and has very minor history with juvenile justice, and also low risk to reoffend perhaps. So the next slide is just if a youth is charged with a more serious offense, or if they also have some delinquency history. So there may be a combination of both level 1 dispositional alternatives as well as level 2 dispositional alternatives. And so this is just an example slide of a grid for you with some examples of those level 2 dispositional examples. So you may hear a court counselor on that predisposition report, or them sharing that perhaps that there's more intensive services being recommended, like for instance, level 2 group homes or level 3 group homes, or some JJ funded services. For instance, multi-system, well, our JJ funded services would be more like our transitional living homes or our juvenile crisis and assessment centers. So there's some similarity. So you're going to see things off the level 1 dispositions that's also on the level 2 as well. But then as you step up, you'll see some differences as well. So like with the supervised day programs, some structured day. So also there may be some more specific. So higher intensity is really what you'll see with the level 2s. So, and I'm not going to go over all these for you because we are going to go into great detail around some of these, but we just want you to see a layout of the alternatives. And then the only thing that we're not going to show you today is of the level 3 disposition examples, because there is only one disposition example of that, and that is, of course, a level 3 commitment to a youth development center. And so we're not going to, that of course is not going to be laid out for you, but level 1 and level 2 examples.
Thank you, Candace. So just to let you know that the section actually provides funding streams to assist with these more complex kids. Be mindful of the fact that Juvenile Community Program serves well over 21,000 youth across our state. And they range from the at-risk to the post-release supervision child. But for more intensive services, we have offered up 2 ways in which to provide services all the way across North Carolina. One of which is to do it in regional-based programming. And we've gotten really creative at this. So in our RFP, or request for proposal process, we give local communities and districts and JCPCs an opportunity to chime in on what is needed locally. And so while this looks really busy, what I have asked Yolanda to do is share with you a zip file that actually identifies the program types that are funded during the year. And that is available on our website as well. Know that every program that is funded in juvenile justice through community programs goes into a legislative report. And so we're accountable for these services, not only for the good work that they do locally, but also we're accountable to determine whether or not they work. And so evidence-based practices is always in the forefront of all the work that we do in juvenile justice, including the decision-making tools that are being used by court services to direct youth to the right service at the right time along the continuum. And so there is an opportunity to serve youth regionally by intensive intervention services, which is what we call them now by general statute. We did a little savvy general statute change as well. We did not want youth to go deeper in the system to land into a disposition level 2 in order to receive these programs. That is such an exclusive population. We know that kids have high needs as well. And so the general statute was changed so that we could meet the child at the place where the need is, not necessarily the disposition level. So there has been a shift to serve these kids earlier on in the continuum with these intensive intervention services. And they range from intensive home-based services to MST, cognitive behavioral therapy programs, structured day programs, and we're meeting that need at a more regionalized area and population than those that are serving distinctively within the county funded by the JCPC. Know, however, that JCPC programs serve at level 1 and level 2 disposition youth. So that is not a resource that you should shy away from. All populations are served by that programming as well. Next slide. Today, I wanted to focus a little bit on the residential programs. These are busy slides because there's so much to offer in terms of information. But generally in our residential programs, we're serving youth between the ages of 13 and 17, mostly because of licensure to some degree. Once we cross over that 18-year-old age range, we cannot serve them here, but we're getting ready to offer more additional resources to you. These are intensive 4 to 6 month programs. They're all grounded in evidence-based practices and use various models. For example, Eckerd uses several different types of evidence-based practices, one of which is cognitive behavioral therapy. Our 2 sites are located right now in Boomer and Candor, that's Montgomery County and Wilkes County. We're soon to be opening up another facility in Caswell County. They're 40-bed sites. They're not what used to be termed wilderness camping programs anymore. The model has completely changed, and no longer is there a vetting process in order to get kids in from all different types of agencies. Eckerd is serving only our juvenile justice population. We also have a very unique program, Eckerd Carr Lake Academy for girls. It's gender specific. It's serving those youth 13 to 17-year-olds. It's gender responsive in its treatment model, and it's trauma informed. And these girls usually are transitioning from YDC or transitioning from other residential programs. It's located in Vance County near the lake. And then our multi-purpose group homes. We have 6 of those. They're scattered mostly in the eastern area of the state because they were built for other purposes when they were established in the early 90s. And they are secure in the way that they are built. However, they're not deemed secure in terms of how we operate them. And so we have males and females at those sites, and the model is a value-based treatment model that is also found on Crime Solutions. So it has been evaluated, and all of our residential programs have been evaluated through our work with Office of State Budget and Management and in the Results First initiative through the Governor's Office. Talk a little bit more about that later. Next slide. So I wanted to give you a visual of our catchment areas. This is all included in your zip file as well. But Eckerd, we've divided the state into 3 portions in order to serve our male population at these 3 specific sites. Caswell should be open hopefully by the end of June. And that will be also a male specific site. We want to focus on more complex needs kids at that site because the model will be a little different. It's not that congregate, dorm style, 10-bed, and then movement about a full campus like our other Eckerd sites. This site is being located within a former nursing home, and so it's contained. And we have an opportunity to really divide the building up and meet the needs of our more complex kids there. Next slide. Eckerd female program, well, it's the whole catchment area is the state, whole state. So just know that we get referrals from all over the state from our juvenile court counselor's office and recommendations from the court for our female population. Next slide. I also included some links for you all in case you wanted to take a look at on these programs. Eckert's done a really good job of professionally videotaping their model, and so just offered that for you as a resource as well. Now, the multi-purpose group homes, while the model is 8-bed, it's a parent teaching model where there are staff on site 24/7, and they're constantly teaching these values to kids, and there is lots of rehearsal in the model where kids give you back what you are teaching them. They're teaching them how to greet, they're using their skills in restaurants. Methodist does a really good job of exposing kids to environments that our population never would be exposed to. A success story, one kid really wanted to be able to fly. He wanted to fly a plane, and believe it or not, Methodist worked it out for him. That was one of our transition youth, but they do a really good job too of helping kids step out into independent living skills through our transitional living programs as well. While the catchment here does look a little bit narrow, we do move kids to a placement where there is a bed at times, or if we need to address gang affiliation, we separate youth. So it's important that we know the youth holistically and understand their environmental backgrounds in order to really serve them to the capacity where they can succeed.
Cindy, we've got a question in the chat, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Charlotte's asking what is meant by a gender responsive treatment model.
It's specific to the gender. So we know that our girls have experienced a great deal of trauma. And so the model addresses that. Lots of times these youth are triggered by certain stimuli, and our staff are really honed in on that. As a matter of fact, that model there at Vance County, we are offering an additional template of being responsive to trauma for that specific gender-specific population, the females, whereby we have a clinical director and 5 staff that are clinically trained to respond to trauma. And what they do is they teach the line staff what triggers are for individual youth. So what we've been able to do is reduce all involuntary commitments for our female population. From at the beginning of this project was 9 in a year. We've only had 1 this year. So it's being able to address specifically for the gender. I hope I answered that. Sonia, if you want to chime in on that.
I think you covered it. I think also it's just about who you select as staff and who you select, what kind of treatment modality. So you covered it really well.
Okay. On to the next slide. Yeah, so these are more of our residential programs, our crisis and assessment centers. We'll soon have 4 online. Green Cottage in the eastern area where we are lacking in that resource. And transitional programs, these really serve our kids that are coming from one residential program to another, stepping down from a residential program, or our YDCs. And then our new initiative is independent living and housing first models. And this is really targeting our homeless population. We're having more and more youth who are homeless at age 18. Next slide. So locations, just giving you a visual here. Our proposed site in the east should be online in June, early June. So we're hopeful with that. But these programs actually serve our younger population well, and that is, we never want our kids 12 and younger to touch our detention centers. And Billy Lassiter, our boss, the 4 participating here from JJ, our boss, Deputy Secretary Lassiter, is really keen on keeping our young population out of detention, and rightfully so. We know that trajectory actually creates more hardship, and probably is a good predictor of kids touching detention centers and going deeper in our system. So again, school-based offenses whereby there are threats of mass destruction. We like to take those kids and really put them right there in the assessment center so we can get a better idea of what's going on with them, in addition to understanding needs of other youth that have complex needs as to if they need additional placement. These centers often serve from 15 days for a crisis bed up to 30 days for, excuse me, reverse. 15 days for assessment and up to 30 days as a whole. Some enter as assessment and end up staying the whole time because placement is generally hard to find in the mental health arena. So we're working with the kid, the family, and the team in order to create less movement for the child and hopefully get them to the right type of service. Next slide. Again, here, your crisis and assessment center catchment areas. We want to hone in on getting a little bit lower, cutting off part of the state there, so we have lower numbers coming from the east into our insight facility up in Butner. So what you see there in the little blue county area, that's a unique blend for us. It's a multi-purpose group home. There is one bed there for DSS. It was part of the lease agreement from Union County, and so that's why that's showing up as a crisis bed there, because it's specifically for our DSS population. Next slide. The transitional living homes are those homes that are used as step down from residential, but also from YDCs and detention. The children have to be 16 years of age up to 18, and they generally serve from 6 months to a year. And Methodist is the provider, and they are delivering the same model that they do in the multipurpose group homes. Again, another evidence-based practice. Wanted to share this because this is part of that legislative report that we talk about, that we're accountable to the legislature for use of these appropriations. This intervention model really does a great job with our population. Just wanted you to see some statistics here. Recidivism is very low for our transition population. So we're doing some really good work. Now I move to another type program that is unique for our section, and that is serving those children with problem sexual behaviors. We identified this service as really an intensive intervention service and started it regionally, and we grew it so much because based on the need, we've now entered into a contract with Children's Hope Alliance. So just wanted you to get an idea that there is an opportunity for TASK, this model, to for you to have access to it to treat those youth with problem sexual behaviors. One of the things that's really important about our continuum as well is that we've had an opportunity to learn from our DSS counterparts in the field that there are children that are hard to place, but there's also a growing need for children that are homeless. And so we know that if we serve that population, we get more compliance with meeting their needs, like making sure that they get basic needs met, a home, understanding how to run a home, understanding the need for getting to mental health services. And these models really help with establishing the skills in order to work on their own and live independently. Next slide. And so these youth can stay in these homes for almost 2 years. Our Hearth program is located in High Point. Youth Focus is the sponsoring agency, and they can serve these youth 18 years up to 21 years of age. So this is a new model. I hope to have some really good data in the next year. We're in our first year of operation. Again, these are open to kids statewide. And so it's not just limited to Guilford County. Next slide. So we know that if youth do not receive a service, that they're really highly likely to recidivate. And some of the work that we've done with the Office of State Budget and Management and the Results First initiative that was working very closely with Pew was to try to make our programs undergo a process by which we could figure out whether or not they're effective. And so from this learning, we had a cohort of kids that were disposition levels 1, 2, and 3 at the very highest risk by use of our risk and needs instrument. And we found out that there 55% of these high-risk kids recidivate within 5 years without any kind of program intervention. Next slide. So what is that cost of a recidivating event here in North Carolina? This work allowed us to put a monetary value to that, which is, I think, incredibly smart information to convey to all North Carolinians, but also our legislature, in order to be able to support this work and give you as a resource those programs that are highly effective. So we know that the majority of this impact is on the victims within our state, but we also know that there are some residual effects of kids entering our system, and that is they don't finish school sometimes. And so there are educational and local cost of court that are involved in every child if they recidivate. Next slide. Another resource I think that's important that you know about is functional family therapy. AMI Kids is our vendor. It's available in all 100 counties, and they're really it's available for all youth across the continuum that are in our juvenile justice system. So another point that I want to make here is that if kids do not have an available residential service, sometimes we need to wrap services around them. And so functional family therapy offers an opportunity for that with support in the home from the therapist. Next slide. So back again to this continuum and what we've learned about how effective our programs are. Functional family therapy, as I said, can be used across the continuum. We like to use it in that targeted population that are delinquent. But we know from our work with Office of State Budget and Management and this Results First initiative that we have a more bang for our buck for use of this program a little bit deeper in the system. Next slide. This is where we've learned that it's most useful is at post-release supervision. And so we know, yes, thank you, Candace, at the end of the continuum as kids are exiting. So again, a resource to create better success for our target population. Next slide. And here are the, got a little delay here. Here are the impacts. And so while we get sort of a dollar for dollar cost benefit analysis for functional family therapy being used across the front end of the continuum for kids that are level 1, level 2, we know that once they exit any residential or youth development center, we're getting a huge benefit for our dollar and more reduction in recidivism. Next slide. Back to this task program, I wanted to make a point here that Children's Hope Alliance is very flexible in delivery of this service. They do an assessment and they're willing to go to detention centers to do that. I thought that that was a really important point to make, and they're also scheduled up to do, they position themselves to do telehealth too. Next slide. Yeah, and meeting the population of meeting the needs of this population is definitely a challenge, because oftentimes youth have to come out of the home or cannot be there near the victim. We do know, however, from this population is that they have one of the lowest recidivism rates of our populations. And according to Carpenter and this research here, they cease to engage in other problematic behaviors during the treatment under an evidence-based practice, for example, problem sexual behavior, cognitive behavioral therapy. So their recidivism rate is very, very low over a 10-year follow-up. And we know that we get significant improvement in other non-sexual types of behaviors as well from exposure to an evidence-based practice. We also know that we decrease that stress of pulling children out of the home if we can deliver a service in the home or in the community, and we also can help the parent in their parenting skills. Next. So yeah, that's our mantra here, and overall in juvenile justice in the section, serving 21,000 kids every year, but also knowing that 700 of them go through our residential contractual programs on an annual basis. And we're trying to serve the right kid at the right time along that continuum. Other resources that are available to you, I've created some links here for you in case you want more information. You want to download the JCPC chairpersons to be involved in the local activity, as well as our service directory. There's a portal available that can offer you not only information about all funded JJ programs, but programs within your communities.
All right, thank you, Cindy. So, as Cindy's kind of discussed some of the residential treatment and other services, because I think it's important for us to not just talk about the residential services that, of course, juvenile justice is funding, and is helping to provide to our juvenile justice involved youth and to our at-risk youth as well in the communities. But to talk about a full array of services, because a lot of times it takes not just a residential service, but we start talking about transition. We talk about, how we're going to work with the youth and family, so as a unit. And so this is our next few slides are going to talk a little bit about just our behavioral health residential treatment definitions. And so you may hear a lot about these in court sometimes. And so these are our service definitions, Medicaid service definitions. So, but they're in a way that is, there's some language here that is, of course, taken straight from the legislation, but then there's some language that may not, that's more I think user-friendly a little bit. So we've tried to kind of explain it a little bit more. But this is the first thing we'll talk about is, of course, our level 1 residential care. So, and this is really referencing foster care and family foster care, so as well as child welfare placements. So this is kind of like if the youth is removed from the home, is in foster care, or if they're in a kinship care. This is also emergency shelter care as well. So, this is used by, of course, juvenile justice as well as the Department of Social Services. So the next one is, of course, level 2 residential care. And so level 2, there's really 2 types here. So we talk about family type, which is, of course, therapeutic foster care. And this is in a foster home. This is with a foster family. So, but the family has received additional training. And so they're actually part of an agency that provides them with additional behavioral health modifications, so in the home. So, or substance abuse as well, substance use. So there's also group type as well. so with level 2. And so this is a level 2 group home. This is, again, this is typically the group type. There's not going to be awake staff. So the staff will sleep at night. There won't be as many therapeutic interventions in the group type setting. They'll have to go outside the group type setting to actually get therapeutic interventions. But there will be some there. But it's not in a family type home. It's in a group style home. The examples of this, of course, they're below. There may be, and some of these, as we know, some mental health providers and behavioral health providers may still, some may still exist, some may not. So again, there's I think a licensed list. There's a list of licensed facilities, which is on the North Carolina DHSR website. So, but there's also included in this, I'll just make reference to the one at the bottom, which is intensive alternative family treatment. They're also licensed as a level 2 therapeutic foster care, but they actually have additional supports even beyond therapeutic foster care that provides more therapeutic interventions, and they can handle even kids that perhaps have more behavioral health issues than those just in regular therapeutic foster care. So level 3 residential care. So this is, of course, group care. This is in a staff secure facility. So it is a freestanding residential facility. It's not in a family style setting. They do use a system of care approach, which is, of course, least restrictive, going to work with youth and family, needs to be very individualized, therapeutic supports. So this means that the client, when the youth is sleeping, so that there will have a wake staff all 24 hours a day. And these are just some examples here. So, and I will just make note too that Timber Ridge, which is also a therapeutic wilderness camp, so they do bill for level 3 group as well. So they are considered a level 3. So level 4 residential care. So this is even a step up. So from level 3, of course, this is an intensive residential treatment facility. So it does provide a very structured living environment, again, utilizing system of care approach. So child and family teams, strength-based approach, very individualized, working with the youth and family. So, but this is one where the youth may require more intensive treatment and supervision than what would be available in a lower level of care, like in a level 3. So the caveat here, and the thing I think to pay close attention to, is that there are not a lot of these across the state. In fact, there are very few, and most of our previous level 4 facilities have moved up to become psychiatric residential treatment facilities, which is on our next slide. So the psychiatric residential treatment facilities, so this is, of course, we abbreviate these, we call them PRTFs. So it is it is a level of care that provides very intensive services. So for those who have mental health issues or diagnosis, substance use, dependency, but it's in a non-acute inpatient setting. So it can be locked or unlocked, but it is a 24-hour acute inpatient. They don't quite meet the criteria for hospitalization, but so they may have been discharged from a hospital. They may have been in a level 3 and they're stepping up. So they do require supervision and specialized interventions on a 24-hour basis. So, and so here they've been removed from home. So, and oftentimes we see kids in this, that's being recommended for this level of care, where there's been attempts at lower levels of care, or they've been hospitalized. And so, they just have some very, very serious behaviors that cannot be maintained in a level 3 or in other levels of care. So you see some examples here. The thing I would call attention to here is that while we do have in-state ones, so there are a lot of our youth, sometimes we end up waiting on PRTFs, and so we actually end up having to look out of state as well for this. So a couple of things, and this is just kind of a little cheat sheet for you. So all of these residential service definitions, those Medicaid service definitions for levels 1 through a PRTF, they can be requested as either a level 1 or a level 2 dispositional alternative. So their intensity, of course, level 1, crisis shelters, family foster. Level 2 can be family or group. Level 3, it's only group. There are very few level 4s that still exist. And so they're not utilized a lot. And then, of course, our psychiatric residential treatment facilities are locked and unlocked. And then there's also a substance use residential placements as well. So, and so those are, an example of that is Port. So you might, and so I know you probably have heard of some of these PRTFs. I think frequently gets discussed in court. Level 3s gets frequently discussed in court. So, so you may see that as a recommendation. So, and so you may have some questions sometimes about, so what is the process? And so why isn't it happening in court? And so what's the role of the court counselor? So here we just wanted to kind of share with you that the court counselor in respect to their role, and so how that they do have a role within the placement process, but that they need assistance, and it really takes a team effort. And so if we'll think back to child and family teams and system of care, so if you've ever heard of those, if you haven't, I would encourage you to look up system of care, and it's, you know, a best practice in how we work with youth and families. And so, but juvenile justice, the case management role is really the court counselor. And so we're just showing a comparison here that within social services, that is the social worker. Within our school systems, that is a social worker or school counselor. And then also within the behavioral health, that is really the qualified professional care manager or care coordinator. And so just some key components of the role, and this is not all inclusive again, but is that, you know, a court counselor is really the expert in the juvenile justice process and in those services and coordination of those services. Whereas the social worker, of course, is the expert in child welfare process and services. And schools, of course, the educational, a school social worker or school counselor is going to be the expert in the educational. And then, of course, behavioral health. So the qualified professional or case manager or care coordinator is, of course, going to be the expert in the behavioral health process and services. So a couple other things. So juvenile justice might be educated the court counselor on those other systems and be able to assist the family in helping to walk through that and to connect with people and to work with that system. But their role is limited in regards to what they can do. And so I'll just go ahead and jump down to what is not a component of the role. And so for a court counselor, then they can't complete documents or applications that require clinical or educational specific or welfare specific information. And the same thing can be said of those other case management roles within social services or schools or behavioral health, that, you know, it's not fair for us to look at a school social worker and ask them to prepare a YAZI or to ask them to prepare a predisposition report for court. So that they're not going to be able to do that. And it's also not a court counselor within their capability to most of the time be able to complete an application for a level 3 residential facility or a PRTF. And so we really have to work together. And so our court counselors and is going to be assisting the family, but they're really going to need the work of the care manager or care coordinator, qualified professional within behavioral health to do some of those applications and to make sure that the applications are done and advocacy is done with those mental health providers providing residential treatment. So this is just a little bit more on the residential placement process. And so here we just wanted to make sure that you understood within this one that there are, when a youth rises to the level and you're seeing the recommendation for placement, that and you know, a court counselor would not go into this lightly. So, but that the youth cannot be maintained in the home and the community. So that there's behaviors continue to rise, they can't be maintained in the home, that there is most often a clinical recommendation, so that they've had an assessment, and that there's building delinquency issues, that there may be, but that also that the child and family team that's for each individualized youth has met and that they've discussed, and so that the next step is, of course, residential placement. So then the court counselor would really be working hard to kind of assist in placement taking place. And so really the steps that here is that dependent upon the placement, is it a mental health placement, as you saw with those behavioral health definitions? Is it a JJ funded placement? Is it even a social services placement? Because dependent upon, whether it's mental health, juvenile justice, or DSS, as you saw in the previous chart, that's really dependent upon, we really have to have the involvement of those case managers to assist us. And then coordination. If it is behavioral health, we'll be coordinating with mental health, the provider, the LME MCO, or the social worker if it's social services. And so I know one of the things that comes to mind is, so which placements do we end up going with? So why do we look at one placement or another? And so really that child and family team and the youth preference, the family's preference, as well as the available providers is a big key component here with which placements being recommended in court. So again, the available providers, the family and youth's choice in that, and then the applications that have been completed. So who perhaps has come forward and met with the youth and family, has done interviews, and has accepted the youth into their care, or been willing to accept the youth.
All right, thank you so much, Candace. So we've talked a little bit about the different types of behavioral health placements. And so one of the things that we do in juvenile justice is I collect some information with court services and our facility staff on the youth that are waiting for placements in detention. So we're going to just present a little bit of those slides of information, and then share some of those barriers and some possible points of advocacy that you might be able to do in working with your youth and the families. Okay, Candace, next slide, please. So based on the 223 admissions that we have in the data set, and this is only a snapshot because it's not all of the youth that have barriers. It's only a small proportion, probably about 30% over the last year and a half. Most of the youth are between, of course, 14 and 17, no surprise. The largest number of youth are 14, but we have equal numbers of 15 through 17-year-olds. Next slide, Candace. Thank you. And then similar to our overall population, predominantly African-American youth, but we have a higher percentage of youth that are Caucasian or white that are waiting on placement. They're in detention for waiting on placement than our general numbers for detention. Next slide, Candace. And then the gender, of course, this is no surprise, predominantly male. And you guys can look at the slides later. And I want to make sure we have time to get to our questions. So these slides you can review. Next slide, Candace. This is maybe interesting. So as you all may know, the insurance companies for Medicaid are what we call local management entities, managed care organizations. The predominant managed care organization where youth are waiting in detention is Alliance, and that's largely because that's our largest counties for the most part, except for Guilford and Forsyth, but Wake, Durham, Cumberland, and Mecklenburg are all Alliance. And again, this is not even all your youth that are waiting in detention. This is just a small percentage. And Cardinals is on the list because we were tracking that data a year ago. Thank you, Candace. Okay, so this is where maybe very interested to know is what placements are being recommended. When the youth are in detention, I want to make sure that we understand that these are youth that are in detention just for behavioral health placement. They're not there initially for YDC commitment or any other option outside of behavioral health placement. And we also track our community programs because they do such a great job with our youth with behavioral health placements. So we're tracking some of those like Eckerd. The number one placement that youth are being recommended are for PRTF. And I'll tell you some of the barriers about that in a minute. Followed by level 3 group homes, no surprise there. And then followed by Eckerd boys. I track them boys and girls because we are gender responsive. We want to see what the differences are for boys and girls. So next slide. Now here's where they're going when they're released. So a smaller set of the group, I think it was 206 of the 223 were released. And if you notice, the number one place that they're released is back to the community. They wait in detention and then they get released. And you all may know this very well as juvenile defenders. People try, and we'll talk about the barriers, issues that they're trying to get them into placement. The second most common placement is PRTF. Remember that there were 97 of those that were referred, and they got 33 got accepted. And then the third most common is Eckerd boys, and some of those youth that were referred for level 3 and PRTFs, actually Eckerd took them, so we're grateful to them. And then one that you might want to make a note of is the fourth most common is Youth Development Center. So keep in mind, these are youth that went in for behavioral health placement, and the court decided that because they had no other options, they put them in a youth development center. And so that's just something we want you all to be aware of. Next slide. So with the youth that are being recommended for behavioral health placements, there are barriers across 3 main domains. There's, I'm sure, other areas, but these are 3 main domains based on the youth that we've been working with. And when I say we, I mean court services, clinical services, which I'm a part of, community programs, and facility operations. So all of us work on behalf of these young people. The first area is assessment and identification barriers, authorization and funding barriers, and then referral and admission barriers. Next slide. So some assessment and identification barriers. One thing you might note is whenever there is a young person that needs services in Medicaid, you all have had training on this, is my understanding, they have to have that comprehensive clinical assessment. One thing to note with that assessment, if that assessment does not document their need, their medical necessity, then they will not be authorized for that particular service. So that's something to keep in mind, is that sometimes that assessment is not comprehensive enough or does not capture what's actually happening with that young person. It's why they don't get services. The second area that we see sometimes is that the assessment is not current. It does not reflect current behavior. So at PRTFs, you have to do more recent assessments. You have to keep doing them over and over again for PRTFs. But some of the other placements, they may use an older assessment. So see how old that assessment is and see if it's reflecting their current behavior. Example, we had a young person in detention. They had been in detention for 5 or 6 months. Their assessment was about 10 months old, and they had old behaviors on the assessment, and everybody was denying them based on their old behaviors. So they needed something to update from detention, how they were doing, that their behaviors had improved to reflect more appropriately what was happening with them. If you look at their assessment and you look on the diagnosis and it says only conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder, a lot of placements will not accept them based on those issues. And I've assessed a young person who had a conduct disorder diagnosis. And when I did a trauma measure, I assessed for trauma, they had almost every symptom within the PTSD, except for maybe 2 in the PTSD milieu as far as the areas that I wanted to look at. And so just keeping that in mind, that is that assessment only says that their behavior is conduct disordered, which a lot of youth can get because they're legally involved, that's not reflective. The last thing is, what role does the sexual aggression in their portfolio actually play? Because sometimes people will put sexual aggression in their CCA and they have not been adjudicated on that. They have not been disposed on that. And so that's reflecting that they have some kind of sexual aggression history, but it has not been something that really is reflective. That may be an area where you can ask questions if you see that in the CCA. That is that really reflecting what's happening with your young person? Next slide. Some other additional, and one other major area is youth with intellectual and developmental challenges. There are limited placements in youth that have mental health and intellectual developmental challenges. We call those youth with complex needs. You probably heard that term. If you have not, each MCO is supposed to have staff that help to deal with youth that have both of those needs, because it's 2 different systems that are working with them. And so one of the things I look at is, do they have an old psychological evaluation that reflects that? Do they have an individualized education plan within their school? So we do some of that, asking questions. If you think a young person has cognitive challenges, it's okay for you to ask those questions and say, hey, is there something that is reflecting them having those challenges? Because what happens is they put them into mental health placements and they don't do well because they have cognitive challenges. And there are actual care coordinators within the IDD system that work with the young people that have intellectual developmental challenges that work specifically with them. So next slide. So authorization and funding. So most of the youth that are in detention that we are tracking actually have Medicaid. Or they have health choice. And as of April 1st, youth that have health choice actually can get all the same services as youth with Medicaid. Before that, they had a limited number of services. They can get all the same services as of April 1st this year. So if they have Medicaid or health choice, they actually have the best service array in the whole system as far as the behavioral health system. But most youth stuck in detention are stuck with, and they have Medicaid, but not the same with youth in the community. Youth in the community are probably more likely to have the private insurance or no insurance. And so if they have that, we'll talk about some ways you can probably query and ask about those youth. But I'll make a note about TRICARE. TRICARE will pay for the outpatient services, and they note that they can pay for psychiatric residential treatment facilities, but not the in between. So those youth that have TRICARE or they have private insurance or no other insurance, that's where we have to ask the system. We ask Division of Health Benefits, which is NC Medicaid. We ask others, are there ways for that young person to get services? Because the old school method, and that we hear it's coming back, is for the young person has to get in DSS custody to get services, which is something we absolutely do not want to see happen. They should, even if it's on paper only, we don't want them to have that DSS custody to have services. So we try to talk to NC Medicaid and say, here's a young person that doesn't have the insurance for this service. Is there something we can do? And sometimes the MCO can problem solve and troubleshoot with their other funds. And try to help that young person. So we will try and troubleshoot and problem solve about youth that do not have Medicaid or health choice. Next slide. The other thing is LME MCOs may not authorize the service because there's not information. We talked about that. Or the reviewers may be themselves difficult. Sometimes the information is there, but the reviewer makes the decision not to. And so there is an appeal process, and we're not going to reference that other than to say when you get your handouts, Disability Rights of North Carolina actually outlines the appeal process very well. So you can go and look at those links to look at how you can appeal and look at the letter and see why that they denied the young person. And that can help with your appeal process and working with that child and family team. Okay, next slide. So one thing I will say that we have to just put out there, that there is a bed crisis in the state of North Carolina and out of the state for behavioral health placements. We've lost a lot of residential beds due to COVID. We've had a big push to get the youth in the community type programs and making sure that they're in the community and not in residential, because the studies show that young people do better in the community than they do in residential overall. So that's what the studies show. But as we know with YDC, there's a small number of youth that need youth development center. There's the same thing, the small number of youth that need these residential. And a lot of times we have shut a lot of those down, and those small number of youth don't have that option. So just to put some context so that you all understand as your teams are working on this, DHHS is responsible for DSS youth, and they also have Medicaid. And DSS has 50 youth on average every day that are waiting in hospitals, hotels, waiting for placements, and they are under their jurisdiction. So with us in juvenile justice, we're not under their jurisdiction. We are, but not from the standpoint direct jurisdiction. And so we struggle sometimes in getting placements. One thing our Deputy Secretary Lassiter is doing is we're working with DMH, and we're actually having a work group around the youth that have the conduct issues and the more serious psychiatric issues. So for example, a young person who has psychosis, we have some youth that have psychosis that are in YDC. That's not the appropriate placement for them. And so how do we find placements together jointly for these young people? So we have a work group that's working on that right now. And I just wanted to make a note, there's also intensive alternative family treatment. There's 1,800 openings. Those families are struggling with taking youth with aggression. And so we're trying to figure out how can we work. Community programs have been trying to work with them on how do we work with those families so that they will consider taking, because there's 1,800 openings right now as of 2 days ago. So there may be some options for our young people there. And then the one last point about referral is it's NC regulations do not allow for some young people to be accepted in some of these placements. So for example, a PRTF, they cannot take youth, that they cannot often handle the youth with significant aggression or significant run history, because they actually get in trouble with the regulatory agency that they are, DHSR. They get in trouble with them if they have running or aggression or anything like that, which our youth more likely to have some of those issues or those concerns. Okay. And this is, so these are some examples of why our youth are being denied. I know you all were interested in those. No surprise here for any of you, but the aggression, the running away, the sexualized behaviors, and then the IDD issues, and then capacity are the biggest ones that I see are the ones that we deal with in detention. I'm trying to go fast, I'm sorry. Okay, next one. All right, and then referral and admission barriers. Some other things around there is that most of the care coordinators who are doing, like Candace says, they handled these issues. Most of the care coordinators have lists of denials. Are they actually denials, or are they just lists of where people have made applications? So a lot of times when I look at the list, it's like they made an application, nobody responded. That's where your other team members can help the care coordinator and maybe make phone calls at odd times or whatever, and try to get somebody on the phone to see if there is somebody can consider whether that young person can be considered for that placement. Candace already talked about who's best to do these applications. Applications often can be submitted when there's no openings. They can be resubmitted because sometimes the openings happen and they don't look back at the old applications unless they put them on a wait list. So sometimes they might resubmit applications. And the big one we want to lead with is on this area is troubleshoot with the child and family team and the care review team. Candace is very instrumental in the care review, and her team works with care review. But those teams, I've seen JDs on those teams help troubleshoot, and with the family and the young person has been a huge significant. When you pull people together, it's a synergistic effect, right? People are able to problem solve and troubleshoot around the needs of the young person versus one person in this one silo trying to troubleshoot. And then the one thing is to find out the main reason why they're having those denials. If they're having denials for running away, level 3 group homes might be a challenge unless they're willing to do electronic monitoring, for example. So are they willing to consider some other options? And that's where the MCO can step in and JJ can step in and say, hey, can we consider this? And one thing I didn't mention is interviews have been very helpful. When they meet the young person, all that stuff they see on paper kind of goes away. And helping them to get interviews with some of these placements has been very beneficial. Okay, and I think, Candace, one more. Actually, I think I have two more slides, sorry. So very rarely are youth getting into placements in real time. So if they're on a wait list, find out where they're on the wait list. And the thing I'll say about this in the next slide is have a backup plan. That backup plan can include the JJ community programs. So start thinking about what other things they can have, because remember those 54 youth that did not get a placement and they were sent back to the community. If they're not going to the community, troubleshoot with clinical services. We will be involved. Candace's team and care review will be involved. We will all try to figure out if there's ways or other options. And of course, your local court services has all their options in their service directory. So high fidelity wraparound may be an option, which is for the highest level youth in our system. And they wrap a team around that young person. So there are other options for the young person if they have to, the judge releases them from detention. So there's some other options. And then you move on, Candace. The last thing I will say is that team approach is going to be key. And I will tell you that for me working with the teams that are working with the youth in detention, there are multiple team members working hard. It's not a matter of they're not working hard. It's a matter of the options are sometimes not there. So we have to really be considering of backup plans, not only for the young person, but for their family, what makes sense for both of them. And that can make sure we wrap those services around the young people. And again, the JDs have been fantastic. The ones that have been able to come to some of those meetings, they have been fantastic to be there, troubleshoot, and then also see why there are issues when the young person's having difficulty in getting placed. I know that leaves us just with 9 minutes for questions, but I wanted to make sure that we got finished. So thank you all so much. And I think, Ms. Long, you might have some questions for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Bersha if she wanted to ask the questions or if she wanted me to do it.
Well, Bersha had to step away, so
Oh, okay.
Steve, it could be me or you. Um, you tell me.
I can go ahead and do it. Jackie Green asked a question, and she is responsible for one of her, I'm sure, many duties is she teaches the judges, but I think this question is also helpful for attorneys. And I think Sonia actually touched on some things, but I don't know if any of Candace or Cindy or Sonia has anything additional in terms of advice for when the juvenile is denied placement in some of these residential placements, such as a level 3 group home or PRTF. And Sonia did touch on some things that they could look at. Does anybody have anything additional?
I'm sorry, so just could you tell us the question one more time?
Do you have advice for cases in which the juvenile is denied placement at residential placements such as a level 3 group home and a PRTF?
I think, Sonia did a great job talking about that. I think that, working with his team, so at the local level, so it's going to be important. I think we don't utilize child and family teams enough. So those are the individualized teams that know the child best and where the child is an active partner and the family's an active partner in their own service planning. But I think that is really where the rubber meets the road and where we see those recommendations come out that can kind of, if a level 3 he's been denied, is the appeals process that Sonia talked about appropriate? Or, is there other options available at the local level? Even though we talk about the service definitions and we talk about the continuum of care, there may even be other options available at the local level. And so a myriad of maybe even blending services that can kind of support that youth in the meantime. So that child and family team can be very creative, as Sonia's talked about too.
Yeah, and I'll just speak for myself. I wasn't even aware that that was, when I was practicing, that was possible. I thought that, if it was a level 3 or a PRTF, that there wasn't this possibility of maybe looking at wraparound in the community or some other options. So that sort of leads me into Eric's question, especially when a youth has been committed to YDC, but there's this opportunity for the evaluation to be done that has to be done within that first 30 days as to whether or not that youth is appropriate for a community commitment. Can any one of you talk about that, about community commitments? Because I don't know if they happen very often. Is that right, Eric?
They don't.
Well,
They don't.
well, yeah, I think it's more that sometimes a youth will be committed, the judge will order the commitment, and then the next thing we hear, they're not being placed at a YDC, they're on community commitment. So it's kind of like, how does all that work, for defenders to know?
So Sonia, would you like to go first at that? So
I will say that just from a clinical services, I don't want to speak on the court services side, but on the clinical services, if they feel like a youth can be better served in the community, because once you put them in that higher end of the highest end of the continuum, there is more risk of them learning other things. And so if they can be placed in the community, clinical services will push for that. They will try to see if that's an option. We don't make that final decision though. So I will defer to court services.
yeah, I mean, we don't see this very often. We are trying to encourage this as a consideration more often now, and helping to ensure that people are fully educated about how that process works. So, we encourage this discussion. So especially at the care reviews when they are considering, YDC commitment and that the youth is eligible to always consider community commitment. So whether or not the youth may be able to be their needs best be met. So in a placement or in with services and not actually ever have to visit a YDC. So most often, and I think it's just our current situation. So when a youth is committed, everybody thinks that they go immediately to a YDC. Well, they don't. So they go back oftentimes to the detention center and await a bed. So, and sometimes that can be, I mean, that can be a slow process to get a bed at a YDC, and also to get some services. I mean, we have some staffing issues. We have, I think that's systemically, this is all over the state, just in regards to vacancies and staffing. But I mean, it's certainly within juvenile justice right now. So we're struggling right now with that.
And it sounds like also, Eric, you may have been talking about the process, like what happens, the defender finds out they're in the community, and 7B 2513, I think it's E, actually says that if the division recommends that commitment services for the juvenile are to be provided in a setting, then there's a whole process where the division files a motion, and the notice has to go to the district attorney. So if you read that section, it gives you some idea. And I don't know whether or not attorneys are being notified. I would think they would be, even though the case has been disposed of. And so
That they're not.
technically they're out of the case. So procedurally, I don't, but I would think personally, if the district attorney is receiving notice of the motion, and they're required to by statute, and it says the juvenile and the juvenile's attorney as well. It says the notice for the motion should be sent to both. So that could be something to look at, you know, on the local level.
And Gary Skinner at Juvenile Justice is over, I mean, he handles a lot of the processes around that on the clinical side. So we can ask him and follow up on that and see what he's aware of, if that's happening or shouldn't, you know. To me, it should be a part of the process.
Right. Let's see, we answered Charlotte's question. Let's see, I feel like there was another question. Oh, can defenders recommend that their clients in detention be placed in a crisis center? Cindy, is that something, or Sonia? I don't know, either one of you.
Cindy?
I think it is a possibility. Of course, all referrals come through court services. So I think there'd have to be a meeting of the minds upon recommendation and what the judge will allow, I think, ultimately. But yes, I think it could be a recommendation, and it's something that it could be considered.
And I think that's where that child and family team comes in, if the JD is able to be involved and have that conversation so they understand all the nuances. And I think that's helpful.
And I will say that also that it's important for the juvenile defenders to have that relationship and talk to the court counselor and let them know that they want to be involved in the child and family team meetings. And then they will, you know, make sure that they're invited, and you know, maybe even hopefully try to schedule it at a time that they can attend. We know that they're very busy, so as everyone else is.
Yeah, I just heard yesterday, so I know our detention rate is incredibly high this year, so already. And so I think court services and just in general juvenile justice, we're certainly interested in looking at all resources and things that would be an alternative to detention. So that would help to meet this youth's needs as well as ensure the safety of the community.
And I would add to that that is a supervision status, is it not, Candace, for alternative to detention, whereby the court counselor can use other mechanisms available, such as electronic monitoring, to supervise and also wrap services around a child in lieu of a detention visit. So I think it's important that along the continuum that folks consider what mechanisms are available by general statute and the supervision level that court services can enact to keep kids from detention if it's appropriate, and also to prevent kids from going deeper in the system by way of a community commitment. I do know that Eckerd has served kids on community commitment, and I think that it's an opportunity really to exercise use of that more with some of our population.
So Eric, we do have a couple of more questions. This is your show. This is your operation. I don't know if you want to go a little longer or.
As long as you all are willing to answer the questions, we can keep rolling for a few more minutes.
Okay. What steps should be taken when a youth is denied placement at Bridges, in part due to DSS's refusal to pick the youth up at discharge?
Yikes. You know, that you have our crisis and assessment centers, part of the model is family engagement. So I'm assuming that the DSS worker did not pick the child up to bring them to Bridges. Is that how you guys are reading that?
Terry?
It was front end and back end. So the kid was
And back end.
recommended for the Bridges Assessment Center, was ultimately approved bed space, but then there was some sort of meeting and Department of Social Services didn't want to transport the child there. They finally reached an agreement for transportation there, but then the social worker with DSS refused and said, once the child was ready for discharge, we are not coming to pick the child back up.
I think I remember that case, because what happens with those is they get triaged. Let me tell you, there are people from all over that are trying to figure out what to do. So it's unfortunate, and we have had situations where we've had to bring in higher leadership at DSS through DHHS to assist us with situations like that. I will tell you, however, if a child is in one of Methodist's facilities, they are not going to forsake the child. So there is going to be a concerted effort to make sure that that child is taken care of until an arrangement is made. So I think that's the most tactful way that I can answer that. But your situation has not been unique.
I will say that sometimes the DSS worker is afraid, and I'm not saying that's the situation with this young person, but they had to transport a young person to Arkansas, 2 young people to Arkansas for PRTF, and the sheriffs took them. They flew them out there, and because they were afraid. And so sometimes their county sheriff, if it's that kind of issue, they might get involved. I don't know the situation, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, we have also used our transportation teams in very rare instances to take children to the crisis and assessment centers, but be mindful the transportation teams are charged with transporting kids that are in secure custody. And our crisis and assessment centers, based on the model, it's not considered a secure custody facility, even though it is a secure staff and a secure facility. So just be mindful that transportation is often a barrier, but the family engagement piece is what Methodist is really wanting.
And I concur with Cindy and with Sonia, but I think, you know, I always want to send it back because I always feel like that, you know, the thing that I think is the key thing here is that individualized planning for that youth and that family that really has to take place. So if a youth is denied placement, you know, I'd like to, I mean, I think the triage, but I think, you know, we've got to lend to the experts that have been working with that youth and that family to help be part of the solution in this process. And so, and we really have to find out what is the reasoning behind, and so that we can address and develop a solution together. So working across the system and working with our partners.
Thank you. And I think this is probably the last question, which maybe Sonia, or I'm not sure, maybe Cindy, if we're talking about a JCPC provider, but what type of accreditation is held by the vendors, providers? And it probably depends on what type of placement or service that we're talking about, but also what process is in place, or what is the process if there's an individual or a defender or parent who has an issue with the provider or vendor?
So there's a whole process on the behavioral health side. I don't know if Cindy wants to speak on JJ's side, but they actually have accreditation by different organizations. And Candace can speak to this as well, but JCO, CARF, there's different accreditations. Also the residential are, they are monitored by DHSR. They monitor them. The MCOs also do some auditing and monitoring of each. So every provider is monitored by multiple entities. And then within those entities, they do have complaint processes. So for example, the managed care organization has a complaint process. The provider should have a complaint process. You can complain to any of the accreditation. You can also do a complaint to DHSR for the residential placements. And you can also complain to DRNC, so Disability Rights North Carolina. So there's several different ways that you can, and I know that's quick, so we can maybe send some more information later, but there's different ways that you can do a complaint depending on the nature of what's happening. That's how some of the PRTFs actually closed down, because of complaints that people had about the care of the young people, to disability rights in particular.
Mm-hmm. And I would add that all of our, both Eckerd and Methodist, are accredited through the Council of Accreditation of Services for Families and Children Incorporated, and this is kind of a third party individuals. Well, it's an organization that comes in and it looks at overall comprehensive look at all programs. And just to add, Eckerd had an exemplary rating. So there were no findings, which is unheard of. Now, on top of that, our contract managers, monitor these programs, and we monitor on a quarterly basis, and they're constantly reporting, because we need to ensure the accuracy of the data, but also there are other mechanisms in place by which we get complaints internally sometimes, and they move through the contract manager to the organization, and we try to rectify immediately. So there are always ways to reach out either directly to JJ or through these accreditation organizations, and those that Sonia referenced as well.
I think it might be good, Sonia, if we could, maybe address that question and send it over to Yolanda in more detail, so they can have, because we had a lot of acronyms and.
I'm sorry, I was just trying to.
Yeah, DHSR, Division of Health Service Regulation. I think we've said that one a few times, but.
Yes, we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
I think there's one more question. From,
did I miss one?
It's at the end. Joretta Durant asks, she represents a 17-year-old homeless male in Lenore County. He's agreed to felony possession of a stolen gun, and adjudication is scheduled for late May. He's got some priors. He's got diagnosis including ADHD, ODD, and conduct disorder. His mother has an extensive misdemeanor record. There seems to be some indication that he might be involved in a gang, and so Joretta is wanting some suggestions for placement. And Joretta, it looks like you're saying that he's YDC eligible, but you'd probably like an alternative. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yes, he's been to Dobbs. He needs something, in my opinion, extensive. I mean, intensive. I mean.
Yeah. So I just wonder, Mr. Ant, whether or not if he's had a referral for care review yet, since he's eligible for YDC.
No.
Okay. So, so if he has behavioral health, if there's any, the new legislation, so that was passed in 2021, went into effect December 1st. So if the offense, of course, was filed after December 1st, 2021, and there's suspected mental health issues, so with this youth, then of course, the judge would want to consider a up-to-date assessment conducted within the last 45 days. So, and that if there is one available, then he could consider that, and then could order a care review to be completed. If not, then the judge can request that an assessment be updated or completed, like an addendum to the current assessment, and then court order a care review too. So prior to considering, going into disposition.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So
And
our
I'd be
care review
interested-
facilitators, we have 2 across the state. So and so they are trying to help coordinate that within the local court counselors and working with local resources as well. Sorry, Sonia, I
No, that's
apologize.
fine. And this is a good place to look at the comprehensive clinical assessment, if it has been done, to see what is the level of care that's being recommended. Because if you're saying he needs a higher level, it probably is reflected in that, and that's going to kind of drive where the behavioral health system is going to be able to go. So that's something that, looking at that CCA, and we can support and help any team, including the juvenile defenders, around, any kind of questions around that. So, so I would look at their assessment as well.
Okay. Looks like he had one in 2020.
Okay, he definitely needs one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so I would also just kind of wonder his involvement with other behavioral health services as well. So
He's been homeless, so
Yeah.
he hasn't been involved in anything constructive.
Recently, at least, right?
Right. Not since he got out of Dobbs.
Okay.
And then a child and family team, like you said, a care review or emergency, we call them emergency child and family teams. Sometimes getting that quick meeting so you can have a plan to even do the care review or other processes sometimes helps, particularly if he's experiencing homelessness. Getting something in place right now for him.
So in some, we've had the juvenile defenders to actually participate, so in care reviews, so with the youth, where that the youth really wanted them to be present. So they felt like that the youth, that the juvenile defender, their attorney, was there to kind of to see that their rights were upheld, and they felt like they were an advocate for them. And so at the care review and at child and family teams even, so child and family teams are going to be meeting more often and should be meeting regularly for with a youth and family and those supports that are in place. Whereas a care review is, of course, not going to meet as often, is going to really be meeting for those youth that are YDC eligible, when there's the deepest penetration or where there's consideration within the systems, where there's consideration for PRTF as well.
And one last thing, if he's a youth that's under PRS, our clinical team can get involved to help troubleshoot. Gary Skinner is over that area for young people for social work. So we can also get involved as well, because he should be getting services if he left a YDC.
Well, I think I'm going to propose that we do this like once a month, and we just have defenders come and ask you all questions. I think it was a mistake for you all to do this, because I'm like, oh, this is great. But in all seriousness, no, we appreciate you all coming, Candace, Cindy, Sonia, Austin. Appreciate the attendees. We are going to record this. This has been great information. I've been taking notes about how we're going to replicate this. So don't be surprised if you hear from us again, because this, I think, has been extremely helpful. We appreciate it. We do have an evaluation as part of our grant funded activities in the chat box. If those attendees could please fill that out. But we don't have anything else. Austin, anything from your end or any of the presenters?
No, I don't have anything. Just thank you for having us. And
Yes, thank you.
I had the easy part. The other 3, they did the heavy lifting, and I think it was a lot of information, but a lot of good information for defenders. So thank you.
Well, I'll tell you this too, in case you want like a bunch of defenders to show up at a DJJ meeting to sit and answer hard questions, we'd be glad to do that too.
Thank you. We appreciate the work that you do on behalf of our young people. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank
So
Absolutely.
we do. We appreciate your advocacy. So yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks. Well, thanks again, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next month.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye-bye.